There was once a king who had 3 daughters. The 2 eldest were very lovely, but the youngest, Psyche, had such beauty that brought awe to all who saw her. So remarkable was her beauty that people gathered from near and far to view her, and began to say that even Venus herself could not rival Psyche's beauty. And the temples of Venus became neglected as people turned their worshipping gaze upon this mortal girl. Venus, of course, was furious, and asked the aid of her son, that youth of brilliant beauty and sharp arrows called Amor. "Use your arrows," she said. "Make her fall in love with the lowest, most despicable creature in the whole world. That would teach her." Meanwhile, unaware of Venus's schemes, Psyche's parents were deeply troubled. While praises of her beauty were on everyone's mouth, no one stepped forward to ask her hand in marriage, or even profess love. Psyche's older sisters had both married kings, but Psyche remained alone. Her father, worried for his young daughter's future, traveled to the temple of Apollo and asked the oracle for advice, and he received an answer, but it was a terrible one. "You must take your daughter, clothe her in mourning garments, and leave her at the top of a mountain. There a fearful winged serpent, more powerful than the gods themselves, will come and take her as his destined wife." The father was deeply shaken, and when he brought the news back home, all were in grief and misery. All but Psyche, who accepted her fate. "You should have wept for me before," she said. "What good has this beauty ever brought me? People stared at me as some divine thing, but no one approached me, and now the wrath of the gods is upon us. Do not waste your tears on me. Lead me to the cliff, and know that I am happy for this end." And so they led Psyche to the top of the mountain, a mourning wedding procession of tears and cries, and left her there, going back to their palace to mourn their child. And Psyche was alone, trembling in fear and weeping silent tears as night fell, and in the darkness she felt the breath of wind come to her, Zephyr, the sweetest and mildest of winds, engulfed Psyche and lifted her, carrying her off the mountain and down to a beautiful grassy meadow, where Zephyr gently laid her on the grass, and the girl, exhausted from all that happened, fell asleep. When she woke, Psyche looked around and found that she was near a lovely river, and that by the river was a magnificent manor befitting a god, with gold and silver walls that seemed to glow from within, and floors inlaid with precious gems. Awestruck, she approached the building, and as she hesitated on the doorstep, voices spoke to her kindly, inviting her in, for she is, they said, the mistress of the house. She was offered a bath, and wonderful food was given to her, and the air was filled with melodies and songs. Throughout the day she was entertained, though she saw no one, and was alone but the voices of her invisible servants. But as night drew near she felt certain that her destined husband will come to her in the darkness. And so it was. As she lay in bed she felt him join her, with soft caresses and sweet murmurs, and all her fears vanished, for even though she could not see him, she knew that he was no monster. Time passed. Psyche grew used to this life, alone but the voices during the day, and the company of her unseen husband at night. She was happy, but lonely nonetheless. One night her husband warned her. "Your sisters are coming to mourn you at the cliff where you were left, but you must not go to them, must not see them, or it will bring us great sorrow." Psyche promised, but the next day she could not stop her tears, thinking of her sisters mourning her, and of herself unable to comfort them or even talk to them. She was still crying when her husband came at night, and seeing her like that, he relented. "Do as you will, my love. he said, but swear to me this, that you will not be convinced to gaze upon me, for that will be the end of us. Psyche promised, and was much rejoiced by the prospect of seeing her sisters. The next day she could hear them crying for her at the top of the mountain, and she asked Zephyr to go and fetch them. The sisters' grief was replaced by fear, and then by joy, as Psyche, whom they thought dead, embraced them and invited them to her home. There, surrounded by golden and silver walls and gem-studded floors, the sisters' joy soon became jealousy, and by the time they left Psyche's side, it burned in them with anger and spite, and they began plotting their younger sister's doom. Psyche, of course, knew nothing of that, and when her husband warned her not to see her sisters again, her eyes filled with tears. "I am all alone here all day, and I can never see you. Will you not allow me to see another face, not even my sister's?" And the husband relented again, and again repeated his warning that Psyche will not break her promise to never lay eyes on him. And Psyche promised again, and loved him all the more. Not long after this, Psyche's sisters came again, their plot complete. From some stumbling in Psyche's talk of her husband, they suspected that she never saw him, and reminded her of the prophecy given at Apollo's temple. "He would not let you see him because he is a monstrous serpent. He may be kind now, but he will surely turn on you one night and devour you. And what if you have a child? Your monster husband will consume you both." Psyche paled at that, for she indeed suspected that she was with child, and a dreadful fear came over her that her husband may harm it. Trembling, she confessed to her sister that she never saw him, never even knew his name, and the sisters answered with their prepared reply: "Tonight, when he comes to you, wait for him to fall asleep. Then light the lamp and plunge this knife into his neck. You must do this. Save yourself. We will come for you after he's dead." And they left her, shivering and confused, a covered lantern in one hand and a sharp blade at the other. That night, when the room was quiet and the husband's breath soft, Psyche lay awake beside him. All day she was tormented, her mind shifting between fear and her love to this what? She knew not what to do, but she had to know, had to put her mind in ease. Quietly, she slipped out of the bed, picked up the knife, just in case, and removed the cover from the lamp. Oh, but this was no monster. The light of the lamp shone in his golden hair, gleamed in the soft feathers of his wings. His beauty seemed to put the very light to shame, and Psyche, so ashamed of her lack of trust, thought to stab herself with a knife. But her trembling hand lost it. The tremors shook the lamp, and some of the hot oil dropped, wounding his shoulder. The pain awoke him, and in the light of the lamp the pain of betrayal was clear on his beautiful face. Without a word he turned to leave, and Psyche chased him out into the night, where he flew away. "I warned you," he mourned, "but instead of trusting me, you listened to your sisters who plotted against you, against us. They will pay for this soon enough, and you that I loved so dearly, I leave now forever." And with this, he disappeared into the night. Left behind, Psyche wept and mourned her actions. "The god of love loved me, and I betrayed him. What a wretched creature I am," she thought. "I may have lost his love, but I must find him. If I cannot change his mind, at least I will prove that I do love him." With new resolve she began her journey. She visited temples and asked the gods for help, but they refused her, saying that they cannot go against Venus, who was indeed furious with her. When the wounded Amor left Psyche, he went to his mother's home and confessed that he disobeyed her, and instead of betrothing Psyche to the foulest of men, he loved her himself. Venus was angered by his actions, but seeing her son wounded, she was compelled to forgive him and had her servants nurse him to health. Instead, she directed all her fury at the girl she blamed for it all. Seeing that no god would help her, Psyche finally decided to go to Venus herself and beg her forgiveness. And perhaps, she dared hope, Amor would be there, and if she cannot have forgiveness, she may at least glimpse him again. When Psyche reached Venus's abode, the goddess laughed at her scornfully. "Have you finally remembered to visit your mother-in-law? Or did you hope to find the husband who abandoned you? And really, what's the surprise? Such a plain and wretched girl. Who would want you? The only way anyone would want you is if you do all they ask as a servant. Here, I'll show you some goodwill and train you." And Venus took a great many grains, millet and wheat, poppy and barley, and mixed them together in a big pile. "Sort all this by nightfall," she said with a warning in her voice, and departed. Psyche stared at the pile, not even knowing where to begin, and filled with despair. But an ant, seeing her plight, took pity on her, and calling all her friends began sorting the pile. By nightfall, when Venus returned, the grains were perfectly separated and arranged. Being no fool, Venus suspected Psyche had help. With narrowed eyes she glared at the girl. "Your work is far from over," she declared, giving Psyche a crust of bread for food and leaving her to sleep on the floor. In another room, deep in Venus's palace, Amor lay in a rich bed, still healing from the burning oil, and closely kept by his mother's servants, not knowing that the girl he still loved was under the same roof. As dawn rose the next day, Venus gave Psyche her second mission. "On the banks of the river down there roam sheep with golden fleece. Go there and bring me some of their shining wool." Psyche immediately went to the river, and seeing its waters, was thoroughly tempted to sink into it and end her troubles. But as she approached the river, a small voice asked her to stop. "It would defile the water," said a small reed near her feet. "And besides, things are not as bad as you think. The sheep can be vicious, yes, but in the evening they come out of the bushes to rest by the river bank, and plenty of wool can be found left on the branches." Psyche took the advice of the reed, waited till the evening, and then collected a large amount of golden wool from the branches to bring back to Venus. Venus accepted it with a wicked smile. "You've had help again. Do not think me unaware. But here, this is your chance to prove you are clever. See the waterfall there, with its black waters. That is the source of that terrible river we call the Styx. Go and bring me a flask of these waters." As Psyche arrived at the waterfall, she realized the cruelty of the request, for the rocks around it were high and slippery with water and slime, and from the waters themselves voices came, horrible and warning. "Leave," they shouted at her. "There is only death here. Run!" An eagle then approached her. "What are you doing here, you fool? Do you not know that these waters mean death, and are feared by the gods themselves? Here, give the flask to me." And Psyche did so, and the eagle rose into the air, and with clever flying managed to get some water into the flask. Psyche rejoiced, and thanking the eagle, returned to Venus. But Venus was far from happy with her, and immediately bade her another cruel assignment. "I have tirelessly taken care of my son, whom you have wounded, so much so that I feel my beauty has worn down. Take this box to Persephone, queen of Hades, and ask her to lend me some of her beauty." With shaking hands, Psyche took the box and went on her way, certain that only death awaits her. Perhaps she should throw herself off a tower, she thought. At the very least it would take her to Hades fast. But as she approached the tower, it spoke to her. "Do not despair," it said, and continued to guide her how to reach Persephone safely. Following the tower's instructions, she traveled to the opening of Hades itself. She passed silently those who called to her. She gave Chaon, the ferryman of the dead, a coin to take her across the river, and gave a honeyed cake to Cerberus, who guards the doors. When she reached Persephone, she sat on the floor and only accepted a crust of bread for food. And finally the box was filled, and she was on her way back to Venus's home. But as she carried the box, she began to wonder. All the terrible tasks, and the journey before them too, they wore her down, and now she was carrying a box full of divine beauty. She knew that Amor was somewhere in the palace she was returning to. What if she came across him? How could she rekindle his interest, looking all disheveled? Surely Venus wouldn't notice if she used just a little bit. But as she opened the box, instead of beauty, a deathly sleep came over her, and she fell to the ground. At about the same time, Amor, now fully healed and missing his lover, left his mother's home in search of Psyche. His wings carried him quickly in his search, and he soon found her, lying on the ground. Hurriedly, he removed the slip from her, returning it into the box, and as she opened her eyes, he said to her, "This curiosity will be the end of you, truly." But she could see that he was smiling, and knew that he was no longer angry. Amor gave her back the box then, and told her to take it to his mother, promising that all will be well. Seeing her off, Amor then flew up to Olympus and asked Jupiter himself for his help. And Jupiter looked at him with a knowing smile. "So it finally happened. After you have tormented us all with your arrows and mischief for years, bringing embarrassment and trashing our names, you are finally hit by your own arrow." He took Amor's chin in his hand. "But I cannot refuse you. Bring her here." Psyche was brought to the Olympus then, and before all the gods, Jupiter gave her the ambrosia to turn her immortal, and as such, Venus too could no longer name her unworthy. And with unanimous approval, Amor and Psyche, love and soul, were wedded. And their join had brought a daughter, whom they had named Hedone, and we call Delight.